Buddy, come. Good morning, everyone. It'll be just a few moments. Happy Labor Day, everyone. Please add any comments, questions that you might have into the comment box, and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Welcome and happy September. So this is the 25th installment of my weekly virtual office hours. People continue to reach out and say that they appreciate these weekly live stream addresses, hearing from their mayor. So I'll continue to do it during as long as we're sheltering in place, and probably a lot longer. This Facebook Live event, is a great way to, on a weekly basis, to allow me to give you updates, answer some of your questions, and then just provide some general words of encouragement. So thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and to work for Sunnyvale during these ever-changing times. I hope everyone's doing well, staying safe. Please remember to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. These are difficult times. Get out, enjoy the weather while we can. But the most important thing is, taking care of yourself, uh, doing the appropriate, safe social distancing, and that's really important at the end of the day. Keep following the county health orders. People need to do your part to stop the spread of the virus, and this is Labor Day weekend, and so I'm sure that there will be a certain number of people that will be visiting friends or family for some sort of backyard barbecue, the last big hurrah for the summer. But continue to wash your hands. Don't touch your face. Remember, the number of people that you come in contact with should be as limited as possible. Only going out for essential items. And while you're out there, maintaining safe social distance. And wear your mask. It does help. It's mandatory. The county can issue fines, and they've issued a few fines, mainly to businesses in the last few weeks. But and then, of course, if you need a face covering, please contact me. People are still donating to the mayor, as far as giving me face masks to hand out to people. So definitely feel free to do that. We're not out of the woods. And we've seen, things steadily drop a little bit from a county standpoint. We're doing a lot better. But if you remember, after the July 4th weekend, there was a big uptick in the number of coronavirus cases. And so hopefully after Labor Day, what's happening this weekend, we won't see that. But, please be very careful when visiting others, especially this Labor Day weekend. So we're now 171 days after the March 16th public health order that started the whole uh, shelter in place and attempted to slow the spread of COVID-19. Since that declaration, a lot has happened. More happens every day. And, I have daily press conferences and seminars to watch. I have conference calls to confer and advocate on your behalf. We are making progress. We are getting things done. So, thank you for allowing me to do that. So now let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at the federal, the state, and the county level, and a little bit of the city level over the last week or so. So it's been, another busy week and a half. Last Tuesday, and I'll go back, to last Tuesday's council meeting, so about a week and a half ago. Sunnyvale City Council met and we approved the active transportation plan. And we did other things, but that was a really important step from a city standpoint. It lays the groundwork for what pedestrian and bike infrastructure changes and safety changes we have for the next 10 years. And so that includes safe routes to schools for children. That includes, what the safe bike routes are throughout the city, what we're going to do for pedestrian improvements around the city. And that slow network, that safe network is critical to try to make people use active transportation, whether or not that's biking, scooters, walking, skateboards, all that's really important. So I was happy that, from a resident standpoint, that we've had lots of feedback on that plan, and that plan took almost a year and a half, 2 years to do. In order to create the plan, there were bike tours of the city with residents that the consultants did to get feedback on different routes. There were walking tours along El Camino Real. So from that standpoint, there was a lot that went into that plan. And I think, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advocacy Commission did a fantastic job as far as giving us additional input. And we had multiple neighborhoods also give other changes that they'd like to see. So now the big, that was a crossing the goal line. However, the real work now starts. We set the goal for a 10% increase in mode shift, moving people out of their cars. But the next steps will be prioritizing those projects, getting grant funding, and starting the actual projects themselves. So those are important. That was an important step from a city standpoint that happened last week. And then last Friday, I said that the governor had been at his press conferences saying that he was going to announce a new order from a state standpoint as far as the framework of opening up, and as opposed to kind of the stages that were there before and the watch list sort of thing. Um, the governor had a press conference last Friday and basically defined the state into four tiers. And the four tiers of opening: purple, red, orange, and yellow. There was no green because mainly, it's like we don't know, we don't think that there will ever be completely green anytime soon. Until we have a vaccine, until people really feel safe. People will, as far as decreasing amounts of restrictions, yellow is the most open, but that being said, it'll be, the a while before anyone gets into yellow. And most of the counties in the state, including Santa Clara County, were in purple. Uh, Definitely, that had some changes. So that new kind of blueprint for opening up and reducing COVID-19 had some major changes as opposed to the previous state order. And so the new criteria, as opposed to like four different levels of things that the county that they're watching on a per county basis. And we had some issues about that before. We talked about hospitalizations and looking at hospitalizations as a percentage increase of, oh, we had 2 last week and we had, 4 this week. And so, that's 100% increase. And so, okay, shut down the county. For counties like ours that didn't have that much hospitalization, it was actually a negative sort of thing. So from a state standpoint, they reduced those measurements down to two things: the new case the new case rate per 100,000 people, and the positive case rate of those tested. So it's basically looking at what those rates are, and for our county and for the majority of the state, everybody was in purple to begin with. That being said, under the new framework, we've already had indications that starting next week we would be moving conceivably from purple into red, and so let me talk a little bit about what those tiers are. So the purple tier, which is the most restrictive, is similar to what we had before. It's like it allows for outdoor dining, it allows for takeout, it allows for limited indoor shopping. It doesn't allow for it does, and actually it does allow for limited indoor shopping at malls. So 25% operation in the malls. And so definitely Valley Fair was opening up, and what they're doing is doing counts for the number of people that are actually in the mall. And the big thing that it also does, even at the most restrictive level, it allows for indoor service for barbershops and hair salons. So now that is opened up on a statewide basis. And so as long as you're wearing a mask, and there's all kinds of prescriptions as far as from a directive standpoint, and the county put in those directives for a short period of time in July when we opened up for indoor barbershops and salons back in beginning of July. And so all those descriptions, all those directives were put in place at that point. How chairs need to be cleaned down, how equipment needs to be cleaned down, what the spacing is as far as each chair. So they were very good as far as that's concerned. So starting this past Monday, it was approved from a county standpoint, and from a city standpoint, we went through those approvals. We streamlined that whole approval process, but that's everyone can now get a haircut indoors or outdoors, and go to their hair salons. From a purple standpoint, there are still restrictions on things like nail salons, and things of that nature, but the city's tried to make it as easy as possible for what's allowed to actually be opened up. And so, based upon the new state order, um, you can have outdoor gyms. So, that's one of the things that the city manager approved, that permitting process earlier this week, and that whole thing is, um, no fees charged. It's all streamlined from a city standpoint, so that's really good to try to make sure that those businesses can open up as easily as possible. They still need to follow the county health orders, and so that's, they need to basically list all their orders, all their requirements as far as people going into businesses, or what they're doing outside as far as cleaning down equipment, all of that. But I was just by, I have my morning runs, and I went by one of the kickboxing studios, and they actually moved outside. So they actually had people training outside in the parking lot. So that's, so it's actually started, but as of Monday, August 31st, so the new state order went into effect. And so, and we'll see about moving into red. So, from a state level, we'll be moving. They've had indications, and I saw something on the news this morning that the county would be moving from a state level into purple to red. But that and red is a lot more open. It also, it allows some interior things like, movie theaters and museums, with 25% spacing and all that, that the county current doesn't allow. So that's still to be seen on how quickly the county order opens up and changes. That being said, I saw one of the county health officials, an interview with him from last night, and he's currently saying that, there's no, we'll conceivably be looking at that in a few weeks down the line. The big thing is what happens this weekend, with Labor Day here, what the question is as far as how things open up. But will a lot more people be affected? Will our case rate actually go up in the next 2 weeks? That's still to be seen. So keep your eyes open but for now, we're going under a new kind of tiered system, the purple, red, orange, yellow system. We'll see how that goes, but definitely we have made progress as far as that's concerned. So, and then, on Monday, we actually saw barbershops and salons around the county start to open. So I saw several news reports from that standpoint. Monday was a big day in Sacramento. So, so Monday was the end of the legislative session for the year. And so the state legislators met. They were there until midnight on Monday to pass the final bills for this year. And I'm still going through a lot of the bills. I'm still trying to get the final laundry list of what was at least approved from our assembly and state senate. That being said, they then go to the governor's office, and there's a lot that I've already seen, basically items and news reports about, please start advocating with the governor to sign this bill or to have him veto bill. So we'll see where things go from a governor standpoint, over the next few months. But one of the bills that was approved earlier in the day on Monday, the governor actually signed before midnight on Monday, and that goal, and that the goal of that bill was to extend protections against evictions for basically 5 months. Things were running out August 31st from a state standpoint, and so as far as the COVID-19 pandemic, trying to protect people from evictions from renters. So AB 3088. So AB 38 prevents landlords from evicting tenants for non-payment of rent for up until March, or sorry, from so previously it was March to September 31st. this new prohibition continues that from September 1st to January 31st, 2021. So renters still need to pay 25% of their rent, uh, and also file a declaration of financial hardship. And so that there's been, whether or not there'll be any legal action taken as far as that bill is concerned and that new law that the governor signed is a question. The Declaration of Financial Hardship was just basically a letter, so it was pretty simple for any tenant to basically say, my pay or my income has been directly affected by COVID, and I would say almost everybody has been done. I'd say has been affected in some way, but that affects such a large percentage of the population. The barrier, and I'd heard people on both sides say, well, there should be more protections for landlords. There should be as easy as possible for tenants. Uh, the final bill that was negotiated between the state assembly and state senate went to, made it fairly easy. It still put a requirement that residents by January 1st need to pay 25% of their rent, and they also needed to file this declaration for financial hardship. Uh, After January 31st, uh, tenants could not be uh, could not be evicted for failing to pay full rent for the previous months, but the renters can be evicted if they fail to pay rent from February on. And of course, the unpaid rent, both the amount owed since March when people started, when the COVID-19 pandemic started, and the portion that's unpaid for the next 5 months um, would be treated as consumer debt. So the landlords could recover it through small claims court, but whether or not there's this big tidal wave of small claims and attempts to get that money is still, it would be need to be seen next year, and whether or not the state legislature will pass something new depending on where we stand in January, February, is yet to be seen. So this is, tenant protections are really important, especially now when so many people aren't back to work, and I'm continually getting warn notices, and so, as mayor, one of the things that I get is any company that does a layoff of, and there's certain restrictions of more than 10% and how many people within the company, but on a weekly basis I'm still getting, notifications from different companies within Sunnyvale that they're doing layoffs. And this is high-tech companies, these are small companies, these are, auto dealerships. It's all across the city. On, companies over a certain size need to do this. So, we'll see, from how the eviction moratorium goes. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, the County Board of Supervisors extended our eviction moratorium through September 30th, and that was for both businesses and residents. Um, and so this is adding additional eviction moratorium dates, and most likely the county will extend that to meet what's happening at the state level when they meet next. As I hear more about the state bills, as I go through all those and what the possibility of them being actually approved from a governor's office standpoint, I'll give you quick updates on that in future live stream addresses. On Tuesday, Governor Newsom was actually in Santa Cruz Mountains. He was inspecting the wildfire devastation. He was basically giving some words of encouragement to the firefighters who've been working so hard as far as fighting those fires. The fires have continued. They're better contained, and my heart goes out to friends, family, everyone who's been affected by these fires. This has been one of the worst fire seasons we've seen in years, and of course it's not over. This weekend is going to be another hot weekend, and that only increases the risk of fires. Some of the scenes that I've seen of devastation of like Big Basin is just horrific, and so it'll be, a while. And as that being said, the fires still aren't out. As winds move, as it gets hot this weekend, conceivably we might have more bad air. But at least, people are returning to their homes. For Sunnyvale, we've been providing mutual aid. We have, two of our fire engines out helping different sites, both, North County and let's say, sorry, North Bay and kind of Monterey area, as well as additional kind of on a daily basis helping out in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So we're providing that mutual aid. That's one of the things that we do whenever that mutual aid call goes out, is figure out staffing, figuring out how we can make sure our residents are safe, and then providing assistance to our surrounding communities throughout the state, however we can, and sometimes even outside of the country, depending upon what's needed and what can be done. So, from your standpoint, it's you be safe, and one of the things that you can do is sign up for alerts. So I've talked about it before. September is National Preparedness Month, and so definitely sign up at secalert.org. So that's all the different county alerts, whether or not that's fires or earthquakes or heat waves. Definitely the cooling centers we'll be talking about a little bit later. And then the other thing is nixle.com, which is usually more traffic based, but all you need to do there is text your zip code on your phone to 888-777, and that automatically signs you up, and that gives you severe weather, criminal activities, missing persons. So that's really important. And then, of course, if you need assistance or want to help donate, American Red Cross has been, so go to redcross.org or contact our local office. They have been helping with everyone who's been evacuated. They've been providing assistance as far as that's concerned, helping out the firefighters. I actually have a call later today with Red Cross about the devastation and what we can do from a city standpoint, from a region standpoint, to help out those in need. And then also on Tuesday, the Trump administration announced that the CDC, and this is kind of on a follow-up of an executive order that was defined back in the beginning of July, I think. And when we talked about it then, or the end of sometime in July, there was questions about, from an eviction moratorium, the word in the executive order didn't really, basically said, okay, CDC, go off and investigate this. And so the CDC finally came back. So the Center of Disease Control and Prevention came back and invoked its authority to halt evictions throughout the country through the end of the year in an effort to slow the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. And so this moratorium, which was posted basically on the Federal Registrar, is actually a significant step taken, and probably the most significant step to spread, I'll say, the flood of evictions across the country. And it doesn't really enhance what we've done from a state standpoint, but it does, from a large standpoint, help the rest of the country. With the ending of federal unemployment aid, back at the end of July, and for the majority of the states, this executive order that directed the CDC, and they finally came back, gives a little more protections to some of those states that haven't been, I'll say, focused as far as helping their residents as much as we have. So I've been happy as far as that's concerned to see, the federal government doing something to actually prevent some of these same restrictions. So it doesn't really affect us, of course. What happened on Monday gave a lot more restrictions and went beyond, the end of December time frame that the CDC's order laid out. And then on Wednesday, the governor had his press conference, and it was kind of a general conference. It mainly, it talked about the fires. It talked about the renter protections that were signed into place on Monday afternoon. So the governor didn't have a Monday press conference, but he's had a few kind of quick press conferences since then. But Wednesday was the big one for the week. It talked about the positivity rate for COVID-19, and it was saying that the positivity rate has dropped. It's 4.4% over the last 7 days, 5.1% over the last 14. A general decrease in hospitalizations and ICU admissions based upon due to COVID-19. So I think that was like a 23% decrease. And then they had about 4,200 new cases September 1st, and a 7-day average of about 4,700 cases. So we're seeing a general drop in the number of cases. That being said, it is Labor Day weekend, and whether or not people will be following that, following the appropriate social distancing, whether or not they'll be doing safe, that's that's yet to be seen. But hopefully everyone will be safe, and those numbers will continue to decline. And then yesterday, the California Independent System Operators, the IOC, issued a flex alert. So a flex alert for the holiday weekend and calling for energy conservation. So we've talked about this a few weeks ago. The statewide flex alert basically starts Saturday and goes through Monday, and it's every day from 3 to 9 p.m. I'm actually surprised they lowered it from 10 p.m. to 9 p.m. as opposed to it was 3 to 10 previously. But because of the heat that's expected around the state for the next 3 days, and hopefully everyone's bracing for that heat wave. There's the possibility of again doing rolling blackouts, and what's bad about these is, as opposed to PG&E's declaration last year when it's a windy weather and they're worried about power lines going down and starting fires, this is a rolling blackout that happens without notice. So depending upon the grid requirements and how much we're pushing that electric grid, conceivably at any given time, PG&E, and not just PG&E, but other utilities, San Diego Gas and Electric, other utilities around the state would temporarily shut down, and it's only supposed to be for an hour or so in a rolling standard amongst the different neighborhoods for shutting down power. And so and the issues, of course, are when the power is turned back on. Do transformers flow? Are there any other issues? And then it's managing that response. During the last rolling blackouts, we had residents that had lost power for up to 4 or 5 days, and so that's unacceptable. But it's PG&E dealing with those same issues around the Bay Area and not having staff to deal with it. So what you can do, and so one of the things that the Flex Alert is pushing is set your thermostats to 78 degrees as much as possible, so that if you have air conditioning, don't push the system as much as possible. Defer the use of major appliances during those hours of 3 to 9 p.m. Unplug unused electrical devices. Close your blinds and drapes. Use fans wherever possible. The standard thing, we don't have air conditioning in our home, and so the common thing is, okay, the sun's down, raise all the windows until sometime 7 or 8 a.m. the following day. Close all the windows, close all the blinds. Try to keep your house as cool as possible. Have fans interior within the house. From a city standpoint and from a county standpoint, they'll be opening cooling centers, and so right now the city is planning to open Murphy Park as a cooling center, and if you're so that will most likely be Sunday and Monday based upon the current weather forecast. So that will have air conditioning, that will have Wi-Fi, um, but if you're planning to go, make sure you bring your mask. That is critical at the end of the day. Is figuring out whether or not people who are being affected by the weather have a place to go. That used to be it would be going to the library. The library is only providing plaza service right now, and so we'll have more information posted on the website sometime today or tomorrow about what the hours are going to be what on Sunday and Monday. Those are supposed to be the hot days when it really comes down to it. So that's our current plan, and hopefully the weather won't be as bad as it might be, but definitely, what you can do, try to stay safe in your homes, try to stay as cool as possible from that standpoint. And then let's go ahead and talk about some upcoming events. So one thing that we released or we approved a week and a half ago was the ATP, our Active Transportation Plan. Another study that's been going on for several years now is our housing study. And so we released the draft document about earlier in August, and ultimately, we've been getting feedback from residents through August. That went to the Housing and Human Services Commission, I think last week, and ultimately it'll come in front of council in October, so currently October 13th, Tuesday, October 13th. But this is basically giving a set of plans and a set of recommendations to looking at our below market rate, looking at rent stabilization in the mobile home community, looking at a requirement to have a lease for any apartment dweller. So if you're renting, I think and that's been proposed, and I think that was one of my big pushes for people going to the outreach meetings to make sure that that was one of the things requested. So we'll see what the final staff recommendations are, but now's your chance to go through that plan. It's about an 80-page document, so not as bad as the several hundred-page ATP that we went through, but it gives feedback that we heard from the community. It also gives kind of a here's the highest recommendation of implementation, here's kind of second tier or third tier items that we also might want to look at. And so now is your chance to go through that plan, write letters to the city manager, to city council, getting basically getting everything out there as far as what you would like to see from housing protections within our city. Our city is pretty forward as far as funding affordable housing. One of the things that San Jose just approved earlier this week is putting in a tie to new construction and tying that to an affordable housing fee. And we've had a housing mitigation fee for years. We have inclusionary housing for any new apartments that are built. That any new apartments, 15% of those need to actually be affordable. So that was one of the things that I pushed through last year, that 5% is very low income and 10% is low income for new apartments being built, and then 12.5% for all the below market rate condos are built. 12.5% of those need to be part of our below market rate at for sale program that people that qualify can ultimately create, basically buy those for having, and it stays as permanent below market rate housing. So it's actually very good from that standpoint. One of the other things that's coming up is our Unity listening events. So we've already had 3. We had our general one back in June. We had a youth-focused event back in July. We had our LGBTQ focus in August, which was, of course, Silicon Valley Pride Month. So it actually kicked off Silicon Valley Pride Week a few Mondays ago. And so that was actually very positive. We have two more events planned. One is for next Thursday, September 10th, and that will be a Spanish language focused event. And so that will be a dialogue between Spanish speakers. So, you can come in if you speak Spanish. We won't be doing live translations. We'll actually have English translations underneath, basically closed caption after it's released later, after the video is released, but it will all be in Spanish that evening. So if you're a Spanish speaker, if you know a Spanish speaker, please pass that to them. This is the ongoing dialogue to make sure that people, getting feedback on from a racial justice standpoint, from a policing standpoint with our DPS. This is really important to make sure that we're hearing the concerns of our residents, hearing hearing their stories, hearing what positive and negative that they've had within our community, and then after the Spanish speaking dialogue on September 10th, we will also have on September 14th a public safety roundtable discussion. So this will be more general, talking about policing within our city. And so, in our unique public safety model of every sworn officer basically being trained in police, in fire, and EMT. And then finally, so after these 5, unity events that have happened, we will finally have our first report back to council in October, and I think that will be good. I keep working with the chief and the city manager. From a transparency standpoint, DPS released officer misconduct investigations for the last 5 years, and so every year officers have about 100,000, for contacts with residents, with businesses. So, so for a city of 155,000 people approximately, that, we have basically 2/3, so one for every almost two. So basically, 2 out of every 3 people conceivably have some interaction with public safety throughout the year. And so, and for every year for the last 5 years, we've had about less than 15 total investigations that we've looked at, either internal investigations or complaints from residents. So from my standpoint, we can always do better, but from a number standpoint, especially looking at some of the other cities, that to me has been fairly positive. So from that transparency standpoint, I think we've been very good as far as continuing those discussions, and this is an ongoing effort from our standpoint. If you want to get more involved, if you want to stay up to date, please go to sunnyvale.ca.gov/unity and sign up there. You'll also see links to our response to 8 Can't Wait, our response to officer involved shootings for the last 10 years, officer complaints and investigations that go on. So definitely be more informed, as much as possible. Get involved. I think this is one opportunity, and one of my commitments as mayor is to continue these dialogues with our community. We had several last year. We've had several this year, focused mainly on policing. But it's hearing back from our residents. That's one of the reasons why I have the weekly office hours, to hear back from residents, to hear back from businesses and developers and all that on their concerns, their issues, or just trying to get more involved. And then one of the things I wanted to bring up, since we talked a little bit about the number of residents, Census 2020. If you haven't signed up for census yet, if you haven't done your census, we have until September 30th. Definitely you'll start seeing people knocking on doors. That started this month. Actually started end of last week. As far as people knocking on doors, and right now we're about 77%. So only about 3/4 of the people in our city have responded with to the census. If you know, if you or if you know of somebody who hasn't responded to the census, please, please, please uh, encourage them. Go yourself. There's, I posted about it on the website, on the Facebook page. Please fill out the census. It's because so much federal aid is all based upon how many people we have in our city. It's critical that we have a good count. And so from that standpoint, it's your civic duty. It helps the city making sure that we have, community development block grant funding that what we've done this year is sometimes that goes to help affordable housing. A lot of that money this year, and I thank the federal government for freeing up additional CDBG money, but the majority of that funding went directly to Sunnyvale Community Services, which has been helping residents with rent, with food, with utility bills. So to me, that's one of the best things that anybody can do is making sure that they fill out the census, that we get appropriate counts for our city, because at the end of the day, that is critical. And now, the county and the federal government are sending people out door to door to knock on doors to make sure that people fill out their census. So it's easy, it's confidential, it's critical from a city standpoint that people do their part. So please do that if you haven't already. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the county health dashboard for testing for hospitalization. Things are looking a lot better from the county. New cases decreased over the last week. Yesterday the total was 17,993 cases, up about 1,400 from last week. That's about the same as the week before, but down from 1,900 and 2,000 from the week before that. So we're seeing a leveling out or a slight downward trend from a case standpoint. We've had 253 deaths, which is up actually a little bit, 13 since last week. So we're staying around the low tens. So we're still having people hospitalized. We have 128 hospitalizations, which is down about 10 from last week. We're seeing a general, at least fewer people being exposed, or at least testing positive, and our testing numbers continue to increase, and fewer people in the hospital, which is really an important thing. From a city number, San Jose, and we always kind of focus on San Jose since they have about half of the county's population. Their numbers were at 11,891. That's about 900 since last week, and they maintain that same sort of number, 900 for the last few weeks, and then that's down from 1,300 or 1,400 from the weeks before that. From a Sunnyvale standpoint, we've had 818 cases. That's up about 70 since last week, and so we're maintaining like the 60, 70 numbers for the last few weeks. That's down from the 80 and 90, or the 80 that we had a few weeks before that. So we're doing better, but please do your part. It's critical that we stop the spread, especially Labor Day weekend. And then I continue to do a lot of advocating as much as possible from a county level, from a federal level, a little bit from a state level, but trying to calling a few of our state representatives on some of the bills that we were hoping to get passed. But at a county level, I continue discussions with county health. We've had our pop-up vans, and so the pop-up van will be back again on the second and fourth Mondays. So on the 14th and the 24th, so a week from this coming Monday, and a week and then 2 weeks after that. And so and the link is always the link always goes live the Friday before the Monday appointment, and so you can set up your appointment. The good thing is, after pushing them, the link is now in Spanish, and in I think Vietnamese and Chinese. So they're finally got that going, which I was surprised that we weren't focusing on that immediately, but that is there now. If you want to get tested before then, if you think you might have been exposed this weekend, go to sccfreetest.org, and that'll show locations around the county that you can get tested at. The the county fairgrounds is now drive-through and a lot more automated, so they've actually increased capacity there. There's testing several locations in Mountain View, Planned Parenthood in Mountain View. El Camino Hospital is also doing sign-ups, so you can do an appointment at El Camino Hospital. So they're helping people in their district. So from that standpoint, there's lots of opportunity to basically get tested if you need to get tested. If you think you might have been exposed, that's really critical. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to some of our weekly questions. If you have any other questions, please put them in into the chat. First, when is the lane closure of Tasman happening? So we've talked about this for a while. One of the things that we pushed through from a council standpoint was closing down one of the southbound lanes of Tasman, because when the light rail was put in 25 years ago or so, there was outcry about taking all the trees out along that area. So you don't have full sidewalks between Lawrence Expressway and Fair Oaks, and so the residents there that might need to walk either from conceivably from either the mobile home communities or other locations to like Fair Oaks and Tasman, the grocery there, they didn't have a sidewalk. So one of the things that I agendized and worked with the city manager about was closing down one of those lanes so that people can actually walk along the street and have a ramp to make sure it's ADA compliant. The people biking there can bike there safely. There aren't any bike lanes, and that's been kind of an issue. Conceivably, I wish light rail was single track. Conceivably, looking at how used the Caltrain system is, single track might have actually worked out there because it would have been a scheduling issue. That being said, we have what we have, and so closing down one of the lanes temporarily, at least until COVID-19 is done, I think is critical. There isn't that much traffic. There aren't big events happening at Levi Stadium, so that's an important first step. I actually got on my bike earlier this week and went for a ride there, so it was actually a good kickoff to Bike to Anywhere month as opposed to Bike to Work week, which normally happens in May, which was canceled this year. September is Bike to Anywhere month, and so you can sign up, you can there's prizes given away and things of that nature. But to me, it was good to get out on my bike and enjoy that. And so hopefully, if you're in that area, if you like it, definitely start riding council. I heard, I talked to several people that were walking down Tasman in the new closed lanes, and they were very happy to actually have that, as opposed to walking through the ivy or walking the street, which they had to do before. One of the other questions that I get is, when is the Matilda Monster going to be done? So hopefully it should be soon. We kicked off that effort last August to finish in August. Right now, all the major construction's complete. There's still some signal timing that needs to be done. There's some safety changes that need to be done, but they're very, very close. So, hopefully we'll see that in just a few weeks. Definitely, I visited there. There's still some of the cycle track for where the Borregas overcrossing goes over 237 and meets Moffett Park Drive. That's actually improved now as far as a separated raised cycle track for bikes that goes down that pathway. goes next to Moffett Park Drive, but actually connecting up out onto Matilda hasn't been opened yet. So that still needs to be done, but ultimately it's close, and I can't wait for it to open. Definitely in looking at how you come from Ellis down Moffett Park Drive, they've made it a lot safer and separated for bicyclists completely. So, lots of good changes there. Definitely how you're getting on 237, how you're getting off of 237 onto that corridor is actually improved. 3 dedicated lanes going north and south. So there's lots of improvements, and they're almost done. And from a Caltrans project, I'm overjoyed that they actually stayed on schedule. We kicked it off last year for finishing in August. They finished all the major construction, and now it's just wrapping up those final things. So I'm really happy about that from that standpoint. What should I, I got this question, what should I do to be prepared for evacuations? So the air is a little bit better. Evacuees are returning to their homes, but the fires aren't over. As far as the wildfires themselves, the SEU lightning fire is up to now almost 400,000 acres. It's 396 acres, so it's added a few more acres. It's 82% contained, and that's spread over, all of eastern San Jose, so eastern eastern Santa Clara County, up into Alameda and Stanislaus. It's basically 5 different counties, but it's 82% contained. The CZU lightning fire for the Santa Cruz and San Mateo mountains, it's about 51% contained, and it has 86,000 acres that it's affected. So, you do need to be prepared. I've talked previously about having a to-go bag now with masks, with food, with water, with whatever medications you have, whether food for your pets, food for yourselves. It's really important that you're prepared. Sign up for scalert.org, sign up for Nixle. All those things are important in case an emergency happens. And definitely there's also an online class that the city's providing. So it's a PEP class. It's basically preparing yourself for emergencies. And so that's something that you can do even during COVID. So that online class will be happening middle of September. So I'll post about that in the notes and on the Facebook page later this week. Several people ask, is there any update on the Fair Oaks Park renovation and Magic Bridge Playground construction? We're excited to see an inclusive playground here in Sunnyvale. So the Fair Oaks Park renovation, and the city has plans to renovate all of our parks over the next 20 years. And the city plans, we do, one of the things, we have a 10-year balanced budget and a 20-year plan. And so that, from a positive standpoint, one of the things that we put in place is, okay, we'll renovate a different park basically every year or two going forward. So the Fair Oaks renovation, Magical Bridge Playground project, the construction, it's about to enter the construction and building phase. We received construction bids, and the council will be approving the final bid on September 15th, so just a few weeks away. And we'll award that final bid, and then construction should begin late this fall and take about 13 to 14 months to complete. So it should open probably the end of 2021 or beginning of 2022, as far as all the final implementation. And I've shared some of the items that the final design many months ago now. And so we're finally getting to the point where we actually break ground on the all access playground, the Magical Bridge, and they've done a lot of great funding and fundraising in order to get that complete. And then from a city standpoint, the rest of the park, what amenities are there? There's going to be a new dog park there. There's going to be additional infrastructure for people playing sports. Several people have asked, when are playgrounds going to reopen for children? So, I've been pushing the county for a while. There's been some, let's say, conflict between the county and the state. And, one of the things that we did from a city standpoint is close down playgrounds early on because the county order was saying that the actual equipment needed to be cleaned between use. And so one of the things that the county finally updated, the end of last week or beginning of this week was playgrounds are allowed to be open, but they, kids need to sanitize before and after using any equipment. The parents need to be do appropriate social distancing. So that has been updated now in the county health order. We will, so I've already talked to the city manager about that. The city manager and the city is planning to do a trial of a couple parks to start. So they need to create the appropriate signs, install them, and then figure out, what kind of compliance we're getting to those county health guidelines, for either social distancing or whatever. We've had some issues in some of the parks, and our public safety doesn't need to be out there, handling those complaints, dealing with social distancing. But so we'll see what kind of response we get from parents. If you are actively taking your kids to one of the playgrounds that are open and think that it's working, definitely giving that feedback back to the city manager. And all you need to do that email, it's citymgr@sunnyvale.ca.gov or council at sunnyvale.ca.gov to give that feedback about opening up those parks and whether or not things are working. One of the other questions I got, I got this several times in the last few weeks. When are the speeds going to be lowered along El Camino? Well, it finally happened this week, and this is one of the things that Caltrans, started a study after several children were hit back in October. And one of the things that's been requested of Caltrans for many, many years, that the speed limit in Mountain View is 35, the speed limit in Santa Clara is 35 miles per hour along El Camino Real. And for whatever reason, it was 40 miles per hour in Sunnyvale. And so it had been asked of them several times. Finally, took a little cajoling and pushing. They finally did the appropriate investigation and said that yes, it is reasonable to lower the speeds along El Camino Real to 35 miles per hour in our city as well, to match kind of what's along the corridor. So those signs actually went in this week. I'm not sure if they've all been installed yet, but definitely those have went in, and it's actually, I've heard some positive feedback from residents, and of course I've heard some negative feedback too, that they just want to go as fast as they can along El Camino Real, but it does make it safer for people that do get in accidents, that people that are biking along El Camino, for pedestrians too. So overall, it's better for residents, that going slower is safer. Speed does kill at the end of the day when you're talking about, how fast you're going in a car. It's after 10, so let's go ahead and start. Let me start to wrap up. Thank you again for joining me this week. This is become a habit, I'll say, and I definitely, it's a habit for a good number of people. Oh wait, hang on, there's a question. Will mortgage lenders also be forced to extend mortgage deferment to match eviction moratoriums? Currently, no. So I was looking for that in the order, in the state order. Definitely, I thought, and that was one of the things that there was on the two different bills. I think one of the bills had that. That wasn't part of the eviction moratorium. Definitely, there are issues trying to get the banks to follow that, and I think their lobby pushed the state representatives to get that out of the bill. But I know the governor was looking at trying to do something, and so I know that there's still work being done at the state level. We'll see what happens at the end of the day. But anyway, so thank you for for joining me again this week. Uh, Please be safe this weekend. If you're attending Labor Day barbecues, if you're meeting family, if you're meeting friends, wear a mask. Be safe as much as possible. I continue to be, and as always, I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. I know it continues to be difficult. New issues come up every week, but your response can and has made a difference. Help your neighbors, make and share masks, mow your neighbor's lawn, share baked goods, seedlings, write positive chalk messages out on the sidewalk, put, uh, messages in your windows. It's all really great about how it builds community. Continue to build that community, help others, especially during these trying times. I'm proud to see Sunnyvale's residents pulling together, helping neighbors, helping strangers. If you're out on a walk, wave, say hello from a safe social distance. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we will get through this together. Thanks for listening. Until next week, stay safe, stay cool, wear your mask, and have a good Labor Day. Take care. See you. Until next week. Bye.